Overthinking is not intelligence. It is the mind sabotaging itself while pretending to be wisdom. Most people believe thinking more will bring clarity, control, and success. The truth is the opposite. The more you think, the more reality becomes filtered through fear, doubt, and invisible mental noise. Your mind becomes a labyrinth where no decision ever feels final and no direction feels safe. This is why you feel stuck. You analyze your purpose, your relationships, your future, and yet nothing truly begins. You are busy inside, but motionless in life. Anxiety grows, identity fragments, and the present moment disappears under endless mental simulations. Ancient Stoics, Buddhist monks, and even modern cognitive scientists discovered something disturbing. The mind that never stops thinking disconnects you from reality itself. They treated overthinking not as a habit, but as a mental trap that fractures perception. In the next few moments, you will see why thinking less is not stupidity but mastery, why starting requires silence inside, and how to exit the invisible maze controlling your choices, emotions, and destiny. The human mind did not evolve to reveal reality as it is. It evolved to construct a model of reality that helps the organism survive. What you experience as thoughts, interpretations, fears, and plans is not truth itself, but a constantly updated simulation running inside biological hardware. This simulation predicts threats, imagines futures, replays the past, and assigns meaning to sensations. It is a survival algorithm wearing the mask of identity. Most people believe they live in the world, but psychologically, they live inside this internal simulation. A conversation ends, yet it continues in the mind for hours. A decision is made, yet alternative paths unfold endlessly in imagination. A mistake happens, and the mind replays it, modifies it, criticizes it, and builds entire narratives around it. The body is in the present, but consciousness is wandering through mental timelines that do not physically exist. Overthinking emerges when this simulation becomes more important than reality. Instead of responding to life directly, the mind responds to its own projections. You are no longer reacting to a person, but to your interpretation of that person. You are no longer engaging with a task, but with a mental image of success or failure. You are no longer living in the present moment, but inside a story about who you should be and what might happen. Philosophers noticed this centuries ago. They argued that the mind is a lens that distorts perception, not a transparent window. Mystics described the mind as a veil that separates consciousness from direct experience. Modern neuroscience mapped this phenomenon and identified brain networks that construct the narrative self, constantly generating commentary and evaluation. Different languages, different metaphors, but the same underlying mechanism. The mind labels sensations, categorizes experiences, assigns moral values, and predicts outcomes. This process feels automatic and invisible, so most people assume it is reality itself. But it is not. It is an interface, like a dashboard inside a cockpit, useful but not the sky. When the simulation runs quietly, it helps you navigate life. When it becomes dominant, it traps you in abstraction. Overthinking is the simulation consuming consciousness. The mind starts talking about life instead of letting life unfold. It starts constructing endless explanations instead of allowing direct perception. This is why overthinking often feels like depth, but produces shallowness. You can analyze emotions without feeling them. You can imagine action without acting. You can theorize about meaning while feeling disconnected from meaning itself. Thought becomes a substitute for experience. The brain also evolved to detect threats more strongly than opportunities. This negativity bias means the simulation amplifies risks, rejection, failure, and social danger. Overthinking becomes a defensive ritual. The mind rehearses worst-case scenarios to prepare for them, but the rehearsal itself becomes a source of anxiety. It is like rehearsing a nightmare every day to avoid having a nightmare. Language intensifies this effect. Words create symbols, and symbols create internal worlds. You do not just feel sadness, you label it, explain it, compare it, judge it, and build a story around it. The raw sensation becomes buried under interpretation. Consciousness becomes layered with commentary. Mystical traditions often describe this as being lost in the mind stream. Thoughts arise, connect, multiply, and form a continuous river that pulls awareness away from immediacy. The person becomes identified with this river and forgets that there is a witness beyond it. Overthinking is not just too many thoughts, it is forgetting the witness. Thematic patterns repeat across cultures. Taoist sages warned that excessive conceptualization separates humans from the natural flow. Buddhist teachings emphasize that clinging to mental formations creates suffering. Western existentialists warn that reflection can become a form of escape from authentic existence. Cognitive psychologists observe that rumination is linked to depression and paralysis. Different frameworks, one central theme: the mind can become a prison when it loops on itself. Technology and modern life amplify this. Information overload feeds the simulation with endless stimuli. Social media provides constant comparison data. Productivity culture turns the mind into a performance engine. The internal narrator becomes louder, faster, more demanding. Silence becomes rare, presence becomes fragmented. So overthinking is not merely a personal flaw, it is a structural feature of the modern consciousness environment. You are trained to live in abstraction, prediction, and analysis. Direct experience is treated as secondary. Yet beneath this simulation, something else exists. A layer of awareness that does not analyze, narrate, or predict. It simply experiences. This layer is often ignored, but it is the foundation of consciousness itself. When the mind dominates, this layer becomes obscured. When the mind quiets, this layer becomes vivid. Understanding that the mind is a simulation engine is not meant to make you distrust thinking. It is meant to give you distance from it. Thought is a tool, not a master. Overthinking happens when the tool starts using you. This thematic flow sets the stage for the deeper realization. To escape the mind trap, you do not destroy the mind. You reorient your relationship to it. The simulation becomes a map again, not the territory. Consciousness returns to reality instead of living inside its own projections. There is a hidden engine inside overthinking that most people never notice because it disguises itself as intelligence, caution, and maturity. This engine is not logic. It is not wisdom. It is a subtle form of fear that learned to wear the language of reason. The mind believes that thinking is safety. It assumes that if it analyzes enough, it can eliminate uncertainty. If it predicts all possible outcomes, it can avoid pain. If it rehearses conversations, it can avoid rejection. If it plans the future in detail, it can prevent chaos. This belief feels sophisticated, but it is rooted in a primitive survival instinct. Overthinking is not curiosity about reality. It is a defense mechanism that tries to build a mental fortress around the unknown. Here is where the illusion deepens. The more the mind tries to control uncertainty, the more uncertain everything feels. Thought multiplies possibilities, and possibilities multiply doubt. A single decision becomes 10 imagined futures. A single emotion becomes a psychological puzzle. A simple action becomes a philosophical dilemma. So the mind delays. It delays starting, speaking, creating, choosing, loving, leaving. It stays in the planning stage, in the research stage, in the contemplation stage. It convinces itself that waiting is wise, that preparation is virtue, that analysis is depth. But in reality, it is avoiding commitment. Commitment collapses infinite possibilities into one path. Once you choose, all other paths vanish. The mind fears this collapse. It prefers to live in a universe of endless potential rather than face the irreversible nature of real action. Overthinking becomes a strategy to remain in potential forever. This is why people who think less often act more. They do not simulate 10,000 futures, they step into one. Their minds are not superior or inferior, they are simply less attached to mental simulations. They accept that life unfolds through imperfect movement. The mind also attaches identity to thinking. You are told that being thoughtful, analytical, and reflective makes you deeper than others. Overthinking becomes part of the self-image. Letting go of it feels like losing intelligence, losing control, losing uniqueness. So the mind protects its own loops. Another layer hides beneath this. The mind fears presence. Presence is raw. Presence has no buffer. When you are fully here, there is no mental distance between you and experience. Joy feels intense. Fear feels intense. Uncertainty feels intense. Overthinking creates distance. It turns direct experience into a story you can observe instead of feel. So the hidden engine is not just fear of failure or judgment, it is fear of immediacy. The mind also evolved to seek patterns and meaning. It connects dots, builds narratives, searches for causes. This is powerful, but when directed inward, it can spiral endlessly. You analyze your motives, your past, your personality, your destiny. You dissect yourself like a puzzle to solve, forgetting that the self is a process, not a fixed object. Mystical traditions noticed this and warned that excessive self-reflection can become self-absorption. You turn into an observer watching an observer watching an observer. Layers of meta-awareness stack up, and the simple act of living feels distant. Modern psychology calls this rumination. Philosophy calls it excessive reflexivity. Spiritual traditions call it being trapped in the egoic loop. All describe the same phenomenon: consciousness folding in on itself until it loses contact with life. The hidden engine feeds on time distortion. The mind travels to the past and future so vividly that the present becomes thin and almost invisible. You live in memory and anticipation, while reality quietly unfolds without your participation. Overthinking is time travel without movement, and here is the deeper twist. The mind is rewarded for this behavior. Society praises planners, strategists, analysts, thinkers. Rarely does it praise embodied presence, intuitive action, or silent awareness. So the mind trap is socially reinforced. You are trained to believe that more thinking equals more value, but the cost is existential. The more you think about life, the less you feel alive. The more you analyze your purpose, the less purposeful you feel. The more you predict relationships, the less connected you feel. The mind becomes a spectator sport, watching life instead of participating. This hidden engine keeps you stuck, not because you are incapable, but because you are too capable at simulation. Your brain is a supercomputer of possibility, but life requires commitment to one thread of reality. Understanding this engine is not meant to shame you, it is meant to reveal the mechanism. Once you see that overthinking is a fear-driven simulation loop, you gain leverage. You are no longer hypnotized by its authority. You can see it as a pattern, not a destiny. And this realization prepares the ground for the core insight. Starting is not a mental event. It is an existential decision to step out of infinite thought and into finite action, even while uncertainty remains. The real secret to starting is not motivation, discipline, productivity hacks, dopamine detox, manifestation rituals, or cosmic affirmations. All of these are surface-level techniques, layered on top of a deeper existential structure. They treat the symptoms while ignoring the architecture of consciousness that generates the paralysis. Starting is not a behavioral problem. It is an identity shift at the level of perception. The mind believes that action requires certainty. It waits for clarity, confidence, perfect timing, and guaranteed outcomes. But certainty is a fantasy created by thought. Reality does not move in guarantees. It moves in probabilities, chaos, intuition, and emergent patterns that reveal themselves only through participation. You cannot think your way into certainty. You can only act your way into understanding. This is why thinkers from radically different domains converged on the same principle. Existential philosophers argued that existence precedes essence, meaning you define yourself through action, not contemplation. Taoist sages spoke about effortless action, a state where movement flows without overcalculation. Mystical traditions taught surrender, where action arises from a deeper current rather than the analytical mind. Neuroscience shows that decision-making often begins in the body and subconscious before conscious reasoning becomes aware of it. The core insight is that consciousness is layered. There is the analytical layer that narrates, predicts, judges, and doubts. Beneath it is a deeper layer that senses, intuits, and moves before language forms. Starting happens when the deeper layer is allowed to lead. Overthinking hijacks this structure. It reverses the hierarchy. Instead of intuition guiding thought, thought suppresses intuition. Instead of experience shaping meaning, meaning tries to preempt experience. The mind becomes a bureaucrat that demands approval for life itself. When you attempt to start something new, the mind activates a prediction engine. It simulates failure, rejection, embarrassment, wasted time, and existential meaninglessness. These simulations feel real because the brain uses similar neural circuits for imagination and perception. So you experience imagined futures with emotional intensity, and the body reacts as if those futures already happened. This is why starting feels dangerous, even when nothing is at stake. The real secret is recognizing that the mind is projecting shadows onto the future and treating them as facts. When you see this mechanism clearly, the emotional weight shifts. You realize that the fear is not a prophecy, but a pattern. Another dimension of this insight is metaphysical. Many mystical traditions suggest that consciousness participates in shaping reality. Quantum interpretations, whether literal or metaphorical, point toward a universe where observation and interaction are fundamental. From this perspective, action is not just a response to reality, it is a co-creation with reality. Thinking about action does not change the universe, acting does. So starting is a metaphysical gesture. It is consciousness asserting itself into the flow of events, collapsing possibilities into experience. Without action, consciousness remains a spectator, floating in hypothetical worlds. There is also a psychological truth hidden here. The brain learns through feedback loops. Action generates feedback. Feedback updates the model, and the model guides future action. Overthinking interrupts this loop. It tries to update the model without data. It tries to learn without experience. It tries to grow without movement. This creates a closed system where the mind feeds on itself. The secret is to reopen the loop. Action, even imperfect, injects reality into the mental system. It breaks the solipsistic echo chamber. It grounds identity in lived experience rather than imagined narratives. Identity itself is a major obstacle. The mind clings to a self-image, intelligent, cautious, deep, spiritual, strategic. Starting something messy, uncertain, or naive threatens this image. Failure threatens the narrative of competence. So the mind prefers sophisticated inaction to imperfect movement. But identity is not fixed. It is a story generated by memory and expectation. When you act, identity changes. This is why starting feels like ego death. You're allowing the self-story to be rewritten by reality. Mystics often describe transformation as death and rebirth for this reason. Not physical death, but the collapse of a narrative identity. Overthinking protects the narrative. Action dissolves it and rebuilds it in real time. Another hidden layer is existential. Starting confronts finitude. Once you act, time moves. You age. You commit. You cannot explore infinite possibilities. Overthinking is a strategy to avoid confronting mortality. It keeps you in theoretical infinity. Action forces you into finite existence. So the secret is courage at the level of being, not just behavior. It is the courage to exist in time, to choose, to lose alternatives, to accept imperfection. This is why disciplined techniques fail if this insight is missing. You can force yourself to start, but without shifting your relationship to uncertainty, identity, and existence, the mind will resist endlessly. It will sabotage progress with doubt, fatigue, distraction, and existential questioning. The transformation happens when you internalize that certainty is not a prerequisite for meaning. Meaning emerges from engagement. Clarity arises from movement. Confidence grows from interaction with reality. In mystical language, this is surrender to the flow. In psychological language, it is experiential learning. In philosophical language, it is authentic existence. Starting is not about silencing the mind completely. It is about dethroning it from absolute authority. Thought becomes a companion, not a dictator. Intuition, embodiment, and presence regain their role. When this shift occurs, action feels less like forcing and more like aligning. The friction decreases, not because fear disappears, but because fear loses its status as a command. This is the real secret that most productivity systems never mention. The problem is not that you lack methods. The problem is that you misidentify with the simulator in your head and mistake its projections for reality. Once you see through that illusion, starting stops being a psychological battle and becomes a natural expression of consciousness interacting with the world. If you feel trapped inside your mind, it does not mean something is wrong with you. It does not mean you are broken, weak, spiritually behind, or incapable of living fully. It often means the opposite. It means your mind is powerful, sensitive, and deeply oriented toward meaning. Many of the most introspective, creative, and intelligent people struggle with overthinking. They notice subtle patterns, reflect on motives, and question reality. Their minds do not run on autopilot. They explore, analyze, and imagine. But that same capacity can turn inward and become a closed loop. You might recognize this in your own life. You want to start something meaningful, but you feel an invisible resistance. You think about the future, but it feels foggy. You analyze your personality, but you still feel disconnected from who you truly are. You understand many concepts intellectually, yet you feel distant from direct experience. This is not a personal failure. It is a structural feature of modern consciousness. You were taught that thinking is the highest form of existence. School, media, and culture rewarded analysis, planning, strategizing, and intellectual performance. Rarely did anyone teach you how to feel, how to be present, how to trust intuition, or how to move without perfect clarity. So your mind became the central authority, and the rest of your being became a subordinate. When you overthink, you are often trying to protect yourself. You want to avoid mistakes, rejection, embarrassment, wasted time, regret, and existential emptiness. You want your life to matter. You want your actions to be aligned with some deeper truth. So you think and think and think, but the mind cannot live life for you. It can simulate it, explain it, judge it, compare it, and predict it. But the actual act of living happens elsewhere, in sensation, movement, interaction, risk, and uncertainty. When the mind dominates, life feels theoretical. You feel like an observer of your own existence. This disconnection can be painful. You might feel like you're watching others move forward while you remain in contemplation. You might feel like you understand many things but still feel stuck. You might feel a strange distance between who you are in thought and who you are in action. This gap is not a sign of hypocrisy. It is a sign of a mind that grew faster than its relationship to experience. There is also a deeper emotional layer. Overthinking can be linked to past experiences where spontaneity led to pain, judgment, or loss. So the mind learned to calculate, to anticipate, to build defenses. Thinking became a shield, analysis became armor, reflection became avoidance. None of this makes you flawed, it makes you adaptive. The problem is that the shield becomes a wall, and walls isolate. You might feel lonely inside your own head, surrounded by thoughts, but disconnected from others and from the present. You might feel like your life is happening in theory, rather than in reality. You might feel like you are preparing for life instead of living it. You are not alone in this. This is one of the quiet psychological conditions of modern humanity. Many people are trapped in high-definition internal worlds, while their external lives remain static. The good news is that the capacity that creates this trap is also the capacity that can free you. The same awareness that notices the loops can step outside them. The same intelligence that analyzes patterns can recognize its own patterns. The same consciousness that gets lost in thought can remember itself as awareness. You do not need to become less intelligent. You do not need to destroy your mind. You do not need to abandon reflection or philosophy or mysticism. You only need to loosen the grip of identification. You are not the narration. You are the listener. You are not the simulation. You are the field in which it runs. When you see this, something softens. Overthinking becomes an object in awareness rather than the core of identity. Starting something no longer feels like betraying your nature. It feels like expressing a deeper layer of it. And this is deeply personal. This is not about productivity, hustle, or external success. This is about reclaiming your relationship with existence. It is about stepping out of the spectator role and re-entering the stream of life. You deserve a life that is not only analyzed, but lived. The invitation is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not a grand spiritual ceremony. It is subtle, internal, and almost invisible to others. Yet it changes the architecture of your experience. The awakening begins with noticing. Noticing when the mind starts looping. Noticing when a simple moment becomes a mental problem. Noticing when you delay life because your thoughts demand certainty that reality never promised. This noticing is not judgment. It is awareness waking up to its own activity. You do not need to force thoughts away. Force creates resistance, and resistance strengthens the very patterns you want to loosen. Instead, treat thoughts as signals on a screen. They appear, they move, they fade. You remain the observer that does not move. Then comes the quiet shift, acting without complete understanding. You speak even when the sentence is not perfectly formed in your head. You begin even when the plan is incomplete. You choose even when doubt remains. This is not recklessness, it is existential maturity. It is recognizing that clarity is not a prerequisite for movement, but a byproduct of movement. There is a deeper mystical layer here. Many traditions suggest that consciousness evolves through participation. You are not here merely to interpret reality, but to interact with it, shape it, and be shaped by it. When you stay in thought, consciousness stays abstract. When you act, consciousness becomes embodied. Awakening is the return from abstraction to embodiment. Feel the weight of your body in space. Notice the texture of perception before language touches it. Recognize that existence is happening without your mental commentary. From this place, action feels different. It is not driven by fear of failure or hunger for perfection. It arises from alignment with the current moment. It feels less like forcing reality and more like stepping into it. You are invited to practice this in ordinary moments. When you hesitate, feel the hesitation without building a story around it. When you plan lightly, without turning planning into a substitute for living. When you imagine outcomes, remember that imagination is not prophecy. The awakening is also ethical and existential. It is choosing presence over simulation. It is choosing experience over endless interpretation. It is choosing finite action over infinite speculation. This choice does not remove uncertainty. It changes your relationship to it. Uncertainty becomes a space of possibility rather than a threat. The unknown becomes a frontier rather than an enemy. This is why mystics often spoke of surrender, not as weakness, but as a form of strength. Surrender is not giving up agency. It is releasing the illusion of total control and stepping into a co-creative relationship with reality. In this state, the mind still thinks, but it no longer dominates. It becomes an instrument rather than a prison. Consciousness becomes wider than thought, and action becomes an expression of that widened field. The call is simple: step out of the simulator and into the world. Not perfectly, not heroically, just honestly. This is where awakening becomes practical. Not in distant transcendence, but in ordinary movement, ordinary choices, ordinary moments where you decide to exist fully instead of rehearsing existence. Overthinking feels powerful, but it is often the echo of a mind that forgot how to be still. It is a storm of symbols, predictions, memories, and identities that orbit consciousness and convince it that motion is happening. Yet beneath that storm, something else exists, quiet, stable, and untouched by the turbulence. That is where life actually unfolds. When the mind loosens its grip even slightly, reality becomes vivid again. Colors feel sharper, time feels slower. Decisions feel less dramatic. Existence stops being a mental theory and becomes an immediate experience. You realize that much of your suffering was not caused by reality itself, but by the narratives layered on top of it. The mind trap is subtle because it feels like depth. It feels like wisdom. It feels like spiritual searching. But searching can become a labyrinth. Reflection can become a mirror hall. Intelligence can become a cage. Freedom is not the absence of thought. It is the recognition that thought is not the center of being. You are the awareness that witnesses thoughts arise and dissolve. You are the field in which identity appears and disappears. You are the presence that remains when the internal commentary quiets. Starting something, then, is not merely a productivity event. It is a metaphysical gesture. It is consciousness stepping out of simulation and into reality. It is the decision to participate in existence rather than observe it endlessly. Life does not wait for perfect understanding. It unfolds through imperfect movement. Meaning is not discovered in contemplation alone. It is generated in interaction, risk, and creation. So the real secret was never hidden in books, techniques, or philosophies. It was always in the simple act of stepping forward while uncertainty still exists. When you move, reality responds. When you engage, meaning emerges. When you stop narrating and start experiencing, something ancient and profound awakens. The mind trap dissolves not through force but through awareness. And awareness does not need permission to exist. You're already here. You're already alive. You're already inside the current of becoming. The only question is whether you will remain in the simulation or step into the flow. And the moment you step, the story changes.